Hello everyone, welcome to Build or Buy. I want to thank you for joining us, and I'd appreciate if you'd subscribe. Today we're going to be talking about NVMe, and this is really going to be the tale of two cards. We're going to look at the GloTrends card. They have two cards. One is the Sky, the other Palace. And there have been so many people interested in what can I do to get an ASUS Hyper QUAD card into my computer, and it will not work. So we're going to go through some of that, and we're going to take a system that'll keep things kind of on the same level, so we're always apples and apples. The real key is about bifurcation. If your motherboard does not have the resources for bifurcation, that's one of the reasons for the GloTrends cards. The difference and the similarities, and will this work in my computer? I'll just cut the chase right now and say, if this doesn't work in your computer, or if you don't know if it'll work in your computer, as we've done with everybody else, ask, we'll take a look. But we need to know the brand and model of your motherboard. The chipset's extremely important. So what we're going to be using is an X399 chipset motherboard, gigabyte. It's one of two models, and what we're going to do is, even though this is a bifurcated motherboard, we're going to use a non-bifurcated slot to show how this would work in a non-bifurcated motherboard. The biggest issue is always, do I have a 16-lane slot? Well, I want us to look at this motherboard that has lots of resources, all the resources to do what we need, unless we go beyond that for PCI Express 4, which will be a different issue in a different video, and we will get to that. And by looking at these slots, I'm hoping we're going to be able to figure out and show you, because it's not just what you have mechanically, it's what you have electrically. So we're going to look in this machine, talk about it, then we're going to go to the cards and work on that. So I'm going to give you an overhead shot. In fact, what we'll do is we'll start by looking at the manual, the PDF. So we're going to look at the PDF file for two motherboards and compare so you can see the difference in slots. Then we're going to look physically at this motherboard in this case, and then we're going to take the lid off and look at that, and so we can talk about the slots, because it's extremely important. Do you have the resources for it? Okay, the two motherboards we're going to look at is the Gigabyte X399 Designaire EX and the X399 Aorus Extreme. Now, if you'll notice on the Aorus Extreme, all of these slots, except for the little short one, all these long slots, of which there are 4, every one of those slots electrically look the same. They're not. They are mechanically the same, but not electrically. Now let's go look at the numbers, and we'll get into some details. It's pretty simple and straightforward, but you gotta see if you've got what's necessary, because in generalities, most of these cards that allow you to put 4 NVMe drives in a machine, most of these are for high-end desktops. We're going to show you this GloTrends card that'll work in a system that's not a high-end desktop and is not ASUS. All that matters. For example, if you notice that says PCI Express by 16_1, and if you'll drop down, there's a PCI Express by 16_2. That means we have 2 slots, and this is true for any X399. We have 2 slots that are by 16, and we have 2 slots that are by 8. Right under the PCI Express by 16_1, you'll see PCI Express by 8_1. Even though that looks like a 16-lane slot, yes, it is mechanically, but no, it is not electrically, and it's identified as such. It's an 8-lane slot. Now, a lot of the systems that you will look at, you say, well, I've got 2 16-lane slots that work that way electrically. Well, individually, one or the other, yes, but when the two are used together, they both drop down to by 8. There's only so many resources on some of these chipsets. That's why they're spec'd for these kind of cards for a high-end desktop. Why is that? Okay. 4 NVMe drives, each drive requires 4 PCI lanes. So 4 PCI lanes times 4 drives is 16 lanes. That's what you're looking at. Now, if your motherboard will not support bifurcation, then you have to have a card that has bifurcation built in. It's all about the chipset. If the chipset on your motherboard won't support it, then you've got to have a chipset on the card that will support that. So this is how it works on this particular motherboard. Now we're going to flip over and look at the X399 Designaire EX. Again, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 slots. And this is an easier representation. All 5 of those are mechanically a by 16 slot, but electrically they are different. 2 are 8, 2 are 16, and 1 happens to be a 4. So if you'll notice the top slot, and your top slot's usually where your video card goes. That's just typically where it's at. Some of you have asked, can I do such and such? Well, you may be able to change it to the second slot, but remember, when you do, the default is the first slot. That's the way the BIOS is set up, and yes, automatically it should go find it. But when you change it, if your other slot is by 8, you're not doing yourself any good. You're just Peter to pay Paul. You're not getting anywhere. So the first slot, PCI Express by 16_1. The second slot, PCI Express by 8_1. The third is a by 4, and then you have the second by 16 slot, and then of course the second by 8 slot. So this is true with any X399 chipset. It'll be the same thing with the, more or less with the X299. So remember, a high-end desktop is classified as X299, X399, TRX40, which goes up, or a workstation class, a newer workstation class. Some of the older workstation class motherboards cannot do the bifurcation. Which ones? I've seen the nitpicking going on the chipsets, and sometimes you have to dig for the information. Keep in mind this technology started for us on the desktop around 2017, so that gives you some kind of feel for it. Right here we are now in 2020. So what we're going to do is we're going to take one of these cards and we're going to install a GloTrends card, Sky or Palace, that will work in about 8 slots. Now, here's the main difference between these two cards. One of them, and they both have the same chipset, but it's the way the chipset's programmed on the card. One card can go in either slot. The other card can only go in one. What do I mean by that? Either card can work in about 16 slot, but only one card can be in about 8 or about 16 slot. That's the major difference, and that's what I want to show you as we look at the two cards and compare. Performance-wise, they should be about the same. So let's take a look. From the overhead shot, we're going to take the lid off. Now, if you notice in this machine, we have a video card. This is the first. This is probably the second one right here, which is the by 16. We'll go back and look at the PDF manual. Yep, second slot by 8. So this is the by 8 slot, by 16, by 8. And the third slot on this particular motherboard, that right there, on this particular motherboard, that slot right there is a by 4 slot. That's only 4 lanes. That third slot is only 4 lanes. So we don't want to use that. It won't work even on this computer. I'm just saying. So 1, 2, 3, 4. That slot, 1, 2, 3, 4 is the other by 16 slot. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then this last slot down here, right there, is the second 8-lane slot. So this is what I want the distinction to be, that we're going to use a card that uses 8 lanes, and because of the chipset, it's going to take those 8 lanes and take those 4 drives, squeeze that down, and let it go back out. Now, the performance results we promised last time, because we didn't get to it because of the remodeling, we're going to do that, but not in this video. We're going to show it at the very tail end when we compare all the cards so you can see how they perform. I will say off the top of the bat, the larger drives generally perform faster, so we keep this apples and apples with the ASUS Hyper QUAD card, and it's important we use those 3 names, ASUS Hyper QUAD. And the reason I say that, the first time somebody asked me about the Hyper card, I thought they were talking about Hyper-V, completely different technology. A lot of ASUS's documentation now refers to the ASUS Hyper QUAD card as the Hyper card, Hyper by 16. So if you look in the manual, look at the BIOS, and you're trying to figure what the Hyper card is, it's the ASUS Hyper QUAD by 16 card. On other machines like Gigabyte, you're looking at the actual bifurcation, which is a by 16 to by 4 by 4 by 4 by 4. So same thing, just marketing, confusion for the rest of us. So as we look at those, we want to use not a 16-lane slot, we want to use an 8-lane slot. So we're going to use either this slot right up here next to the video card, or we'll go down to this bottom slot. My preference right now is to use this one right up here next to the video cards. That's where we're going. And by the way, you're going to need a micro screwdriver, so if you don't have one, you're going to need to get one, because we're going to need to put the NVMe drives on the card. I'm also going to suit up. I'm going to get my grounded wrist strap on. I'm going to put my gloves on. I'm just saying, for those of you that aren't familiar with people doing that, we used to not do that. But on these machines, they're very sensitive. Don't have time for ESD, which is an electrostatic discharge, which has a residual buildup. So I'm putting the gloves on. So I guess you could say we're going to do an unboxing and setup. I'm going to get the Sky out, and I'm going to get the Palace out. Nothing like a little brown box. I'm going to label this box so I'll know what I'm doing. Sky, set that aside. Now we need the Palace. Oh, wrong card. Wow, that's interesting. Now what would someone be doing with 256 gigs of RAM? That's a sneak peek of things to come. 32 gigs of DDR4, Corsair, 256 gigs of 3200 megahertz. Vengeance LPX. So, something to look forward to. Let's see if this is what we're looking for. It's like going on an Easter egg hunt. There we are. Palace. For the sake of conversation, I'm going to take this computer and set it aside. We're going to take these 2 cards out and take a look at them so we can go do the flip-flop, look at them from overhead. 2 cards. Ready to go. Tail of 2 cards. Both of them are sealed. I like that factory seal. We don't even get that on motherboards anymore. What's with that? Especially for what they cost. Okay, time to suit up. We started using anti-static gloves when Intel came out with the ball grid array. And I thought, yeah, not interested. Here I am wearing them. So for those of you that are not familiar with somebody putting these on, can't afford for these computers to go down. So don't have time for an electrostatic discharge. Sky, Palace. Now, of these two cards, Palace came out first and then Sky came out second. They both use the same chipset. We'll give that information for you to look at so you can research it. And it's the way the chipset's programmed that allows these cards to do what they do. For example, Palace has to have a 16-lane slot. Sky can use a 16-lane, but can also use an 8-lane slot. And we're going with the 8-lane slot. That's why we're using the newer card, but I want to compare and show you the differences in the two. Performance should be about the same. So it's really nice as we open these two boxes, see what we've got. Both cards show installation instructions, pretty simple and straightforward. The second card, the newer card, Sky, has some other information of a 4-bay or 4-drive NVMe adapter or an add-in card from GloTrends. The model is Sky, PCB plus aluminum cover, their website, and also their email address. And for those with your smartphone, take a picture of that, scan that in, it'll take you right to that information. Now, we're going to put some links up, which will include not just to the GloTrends store, but directly into these two cards so you can look at if you want to compare. We'll also include the links into Amazon where these cards are for sale as well. So if you want to buy them direct from GloTrends or if you want to buy them through Amazon, whatever your choice is. Information is different in both places. What I like about going to Amazon, it'll show you when the date, when the product was first available, and I think that's important. The other thing you'll get that you don't find on the manufacturer's website is when you go to Amazon, you can read the Q&A of some of the things that to me are kind of confusing when some of the specs say they're both the same, which they're not. If you look in some of the questions, some of the things I'm going to show you that I've already told with you, but I will reiterate to drive that point home about what these two cards are. They are different. And that's important you'll get when you read the Amazon reviews. Look at what people say, but more importantly, look at the questions that are being asked and how they're being answered. So I think that's extremely important. And that's what we're trying to do here, is this we're doing different than we did the other video about the ASUS Hyper QUAD card version 1. And yes, there's a version 2 that we'll get to. And yes, there's a third card that ASUS makes that is PCI Express 4. We'll get to that, but we got to build something else that'll house it. So we'll get to it. But back to this. I want to look at these two cards and compare the differences and show you how they look, and what's what and why. You know, it's like computer technology. You know, why do they build them like they do? Well, because they want you to upgrade. And at some point, we were told years ago, manufacturing for the motherboard, they've got like I think it's about a 12-month or 9-month design process that has, again, about a 9 or 12-month shelf life. So at some point you have to cut it off and move forward, or else you'd never get anything out the door because you're always trying to improve it. At some point you have to cut it off, go on. So that's what we're looking at to compare these two cards. They're not that old. The first one, 2017. This newer one, probably 2019 or maybe 2020, depending on what you're looking at when it came available. It's one thing when they say it became available. It's another when you could actually buy it. So I'm just saying. We'll flip the cards out. We'll flip the materials out. And you can tell a little bit of difference in the design as we look at these two cards. They both have a fan. They both have an aluminum cover. We'll look at the rear. This card is totally enclosed. This card has to have an extra power tap. And if you'll notice the thickness of the two cards, pretty much about the same. We may have drives on both sides of the card. We're going to find out. So I'm going to look at the top. And I don't know if you can see that or not, but the top of the card on the left, which is the Sky, it has a laser etched GloTrends logo on it, whereas the other one does not. Palace, Sky. Looking at the back, again, pretty much the same. A panel to be removed, a panel to be removed. So we look at the ends, pretty much the same. This has look a little bit better, I think, airflow than this one does. The fans look similar. I would say this one has better airflow than this one does, just based on the fan looks about the same size, but the area around the circumference looks like there's more space in this one. And they both look like they work in a 16-lane slot. They do. But the distinction being of these two cards, this one requires a 16-lane slot. This one can work in a 16-lane slot, but this only requires an 8-lane slot. And that's what we're going for, is an 8-lane slot, because I've had so many people asking us about, will this ASUS Hyper QUAD card work in my machine? And I say, well, it depends on the resources. And if we go through the education process, which I don't mind, it's fine, because the questions you guys ask helps us to make better videos and also makes me smarter. Because what I've learned, The more I realize, the more I learn, the more I realize how little I know. And this is all temporary knowledge, because as soon as you get it figured out, it changes and we move on to the next one. But we need to do this because there's a lot of people wanting to do this that can't use the ASUS Hyper QUAD card. These cards have bifurcation built in. So this is the card we're going to install. There's no reason to install this, but we'll take a look at it. Looks like the bracket got bent a little bit. Bend that back. Same with this one. Looks like it had some rough handling. Bend that back a little bit. But this is the card we're going to install. So I'm going to set these aside for the moment so we can get the system back up here. And then this is the card we're going to pull out and we're going to install. This one will go over here. For the time being, this one will go up here. Again, to reiterate, we're going to use the same NVMe drives in this card as we used in the ASUS Hyper QUAD card. If I were putting this in my machine, I would probably go for the 2 terabyte drives. We want to keep apples and apples as we go through the test. Okay, the GloTrends Sky card. We need to get some memory on this card. So while we have the table free, pull a rabbit out of my hat, and we have Samsung 500 gig 970 Evo Plus NVMe M.2 drives. By the time you see this, it's all about price and performance, bang for the buck. There may be something better coming out. By the time you see this video, the version 2 of the PCI Express 4 drives may be coming out, which would make the version 1 of the PCI Express 4 drives less expensive. And if I had to choose between either one of those, they're backwards compatible, get whichever one is bang for the buck. We're showing what happened to be bang for the buck at the time, and because we had these, we've been sitting on them for this video, this is what we're going to use so we can compare to the other card. But when we get to the final whiz bang, going for broke, the whole 9 yards, then we're going to install 2 terabyte drives on that card and compare. But we'll start with these drives and do some tests and see what we've got. So now let's get some memory on the card. 4 drives, 1 card. We'll get these out of the package and we'll get the lid off of that. Again, sealed packages. Why can't we do that with motherboards? That's going to sound like a broken record with me, but man, I tell you, if it wasn't for the deal with the motherboards, with the ESD, I wouldn't be doing this. But because I'm concerned about it, I wear these and this. Drive 1, drive 2, drive 3, and drive 4. And if anybody's wondering, we're not doing anything with RAID. This is strictly about the cards and hardware. RAID is a function of the BIOS. I will say if you want to do RAID with these, though, these are for soft RAID, not hard RAID, which would be a BIOS RAID, according to what GloTrends said. But we'll see, because I'm curious. I want to know. A lot of this stuff, you can read about it all day long, but until you do it, until you experience it, it's not the same. Because once you've experienced it, you'll find subtle nuances that are like, oh, I didn't know that, or why didn't they say that? They know that, but they didn't tell us that. We have to figure it out. So just saying. Okay, 4 drives. Now in the box, GloTrends has the card, and on the side compartment, we also have the thermal pads, an extra screw to set the card down in the motherboard, in the case. Also, the little bitty screws that attach the NVMe drives to the card are also in here. And there's also a separate bracket if for some reason, oh wow, they've even included the micro screwdriver in here. Impressive. But there's also a mini bracket in here if you need to use the mini bracket instead of the regular height bracket. Regular size bracket, mini bracket. We'll set that aside. Screwdriver included, parts bag. So when you take the lid off, and there's a lid on both sides, front and back. 2 drives on this side, 2 drives on this side. We're going to put all 4 of these drives in. So with their screwdriver, screws are not tight. 1. I will say at this point it would be a good idea to have like a little parts holder, a little parts tray to put these tiny little screws in, because if they start rolling and they keep rolling, they can keep going, and they're like a dust bunny. They're gone. So you might want to think about that. Screw number 2, screw number 3, screw number 4. Lift up the panel. Wow, that's a hefty piece of aluminum. Wow, that'll help with cooling. Okay, it's interesting to note how these are configured on here. If you notice, this is 1 and 3, which means on the other side is 2 and 4. That distinction is important to note. 1, 2, 3, 4. Get the right direction for the slot. And if you notice the slot, set that down for just a second. For what it's worth, for people that are asking, right there, that's a single key. If it had 2 keys, it'd be a regular SSD. But this is not a regular SSD, not a regular M.2 SSD. This is an NVMe SSD. In other words, it's not a SATA. It's NVMe. So it requires 4 PCI lanes. Just saying. So drop that in, plug that in, drop it down, pull up number 2, turn it around, drop that in, you hear them click. Now they're up a little bit. All we have to do is drop them down and get the screws on them. This is the tricky part. First drive installed, second drive. Okay, 2 drives installed. Now I want to take a moment to talk about heat dissipation. For those that tell me to take the labels off, I hear what you're saying. Just in case, I want to test them first. So if there's any issues, if I need to send them back, manufacturers can't tell us we can't take the labels off because they can't do that. But just in case, before I do all the pads and stuff, I just want to test to make sure everything's good to go. Then I can come back and do all that. I'm just saying. Okay, we have the first side on. Before I put the lid and all the goodies on with the pads, I'm going to go ahead and flip it over, and we're going to take a look at the second side. 4 screws again, so we'll take this off, just like we did the other one. This side's put down a little tighter. Didn't expect that. Number 2, number 3. Impressed they included the screwdriver to do this with. Really surprised. Number 4. Lift that lid off. Ooh, that's pretty thin. That's interesting. Here's the lid for the back, and here's the lid for the front. Back, front. As long as it works. Take those 2, set them aside. Move these 2 up, and these will just be a straight plug-in. There's no turning them around this time. First one, M.2 number 2. That one's in. Second one, M.2 number 4. Now, since I'm right-handed, I'm going to turn the card around so these screws are over here so I can do this with my fingers. Parts bag. We'll get our screws out to attach the drives to the card. These are tiny. Now then, I'm going to turn that back over, and these screws are the wrong screws. Those are the lid screws. So I'll take those back out. Be careful, don't drop those screws, because if you do, like inside, it's a bit of a bear to get out. I'm just saying. First drive. For those of you wondering how I do that, that's how I hold that. Press that down, line that up, tilt that up, and away we go. Okay. Okay, now we have our 4 drives in. So as we look at the card and inspect it, we've got 2 drives on each side. We need to get the covers on. Yes, we need to get the thermal pads on. What's interesting is once I put these thermal pads on, they stay. So if I move them to a different card, I will lose these thermal pads and have to get more thermal pads. So we're going to mount these, and they're going to stay. Now in the documentation, if you'll notice their video, they show they cut the pads up and put them on in pieces. And these are scored, so that can be done, so that way you're covering the chips. And you can kind of notice where the chips are. 1, 2, and 3, and then of course right here. These pads are scored, so I can peel them off. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I just put it down solid, I won't quite cover everything, so I'm going to break them apart the way they showed. These pads are not as well sized as I would like, but if I do them this way, I should have enough that I can reuse the pads if I have to. Okay, that's one set of pads. Not real pretty, but it does the job. If I try to use the full size of the pad, they extend over the edge too much. So by using the individual squares, I get pretty good coverage. 1, 2. Those should best be handled with a pair of tweezers. I don't have a pair of tweezers on me right now. I think that'll do the job. So that's the back side. Watch the screw holes. We can put this back on. Now for a permanent installation, yes, you'll probably want to take the labels off, but this is not a permanent installation. We're doing a test, and a test only. This is not going to stay this way. We swap stuff in and out. You have to keep that in mind. These are not permanent installations. So if you're going to do a permanent installation, peel the labels off, put your thermal pads down. So we're going to take our screws one at a time. 1, just going to get them in, not going to set them until we get them all down. 2, 3, and number 4. Once all 4 screws are down, now we'll set them. Okay, those 4. Now the other side, the front side, more thermal pads. The thermal pads are a little bit tedious, but it's necessary. And I would suggest if you've got some tweezers to do this with, use them. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, we got our 4 thermal pads. Again, this is the front side. Put that down. 4 screws. We'll want to be sure and save our other thermal pads because we may need them later when we start moving stuff around again. Screw number 1, and again, I'm just going to get these started. I'm not going to get it all the way down until I can get them set. It's interesting doing this. For those of you that aren't aware, I've got 3 conversations going on in my head. 1, what I'm talking about, what I'm saying, and 2, what I'm doing, and number 3, what you were seeing. I'm trying to make sure all 3 of those conversations are occurring in real time, in concert, so this all makes sense. And watching the equipment that I'm doing this with to make sure we see it. Voila. That was tedious. Now we'll get those screws down all the way and get that secure. Then we'll get it in the computer. So we got to get the computer up. So number 1, that one's secured. Number 2, get that one secured. Number 3, we'll get that one secured. And number 4, that's secured. Now it's interesting to note there is no switch on here to turn this to high or low. So whatever the fan is what it's going to be. There's no way to adjust it. It is what it is. Okay, we have a card done. At this point, we want to make sure we take care of these thermal pads. So I have 2 complete sets left. I have 4 pads on another set. So I'm putting the lid back on them so I can preserve them. And I'll put them back in a bag so I don't lose them. At some point, we'll put this in a machine, put larger drives in. But at this point, this is strictly about proof of concept, get it up and running, and to show you that this will work in a system that doesn't require bifurcation, because bifurcation is built onto the card. It's because of the chipset that's on that card. And both these cards use the same chipset, they're just configured differently. One uses the 16-lane slot, and this particular card can use either one, 8-lane or 16-lane. We're going to put in an 8-lane slot. It's good to know you've got the packaging in case you have to send anything back. I'm just saying. With the manufacturer, you've got whatever their time frame is, but first you deal with the seller. You got 30 days with the seller, so if you have to send something back, it's good to have that packaging. And if it goes back to the manufacturer, you got the manufacturer's warranty, or whatever the term of that is. So keep that packaging for that amount of time. I always get asked that question, so I think it needs to be restated. Hope that helps. To keep the card secure while we're moving it around in the computer, I'll put it back in this box it came in to protect it, so I can set it over to one side, but it'll be off the mat. Okay, we've got our computer back up here. Now we're going to get the card and get it installed. Card's over to one side. I put it back in the box to protect it. Got it over here on the mat. So I'm going to line this up and get an idea where this needs to go. That slot. It's nice that this particular screw that I've just pulled out, GloTrends also includes one of those to put in the case. I've never seen that before. So that's nice, just in case. Pull the blank out. Now we'll take this card, set it in, make sure the lock back here is open. Pull that down. Away we go. Heard it lock in. We'll put the screw back, secure it. We should be ready now to power up the smoke test, make sure everything's functioning. So I like to listen to all that. I got the PC speaker on there on the motherboard. You don't get those with cases anymore, but that's just something I like to hear, that it's part of the rhythm of a system coming up. What we want to do is go into the BIOS and see if the card is recognized and the drives are recognized. Again, this is nothing about bifurcation, but just we want to make sure it's recognized before we go into the operating system. Now we're booted up, got the BIOS up, pressing the delete key to get in. So what I'm going to do is show you what we can see in the BIOS. We won't see the card, but we'll see the drives. And that's what's important, because if we're seeing the drives, then we can do whatever we need to with them. So let's go to the BIOS. The magic of using a video switch. Okay, we're going to go to Peripherals, right down here, NVMe Configuration. I'll double click on that. And if you'll notice, the first drive is the boot drive. And the boot drive in this machine happens to be the boot drive that's on the motherboard. And right down under that cover is the 2 terabyte boot drive that you're seeing. These other 4 drives you're seeing are on this card. I hope pointing that out helps so you understand what we need to see, because if the BIOS doesn't see the drives, the operating system is not going to see the drives. It's conceptual. So back to the BIOS. So the first drive is the boot drive that's on the motherboard. The other 4 drives, all 500 gig drives, are on that card. So now what we want to do is we'll go into the operating system, we'll go into Device Manager, and we'll see if we can see those drives. Now, the drives have not been formatted, so we have to use Windows Disk Manager to format each drive. Then they pop up, and then they'll show within the Windows Explorer. So we'll go through the process because, again, this is about the card, nothing to do with RAID. Although if you want to do RAID, software RAID, I'm curious if it can do hardware RAID. Based on what I see there in the BIOS, it should be able to. And just for grins, I may try it. But the first thing I'm going to do is we'll go through the steps 1, 2, 3, show you how to do disk management, because we may take some of these things for granted. We don't mean to skip over it, but I want to make sure we're complete, so we answer everything according to your questions, so this will work for you. This is an amazing little card. It's got bifurcation built in. We're able to see those 4 drives. We're on a non-bifurcated slot. And once we get them formatted, we'll test, see what they've got. We'll do a software RAID, put them all together, see what kind of performance we get. Okay, so we are going to reboot So we need to exit out of this, which would be escape and escape. Save and exit. Enter. Save configuration, yes. Computer will now reboot. Now once it comes back, we'll go into Windows, we'll go through the process. First thing to do will be to look at the drives. We'll see them in Device Manager. Second thing will be to go into Disk Management and format all 4 of the drives so we can see all 4 drives. Then we can test them, see what kind of performance they've got. Then the next thing we'll do is we'll go back and put them together in a software RAID and do a performance test and see what that does. Now that we have Windows up and running, what I'm going to do is go into Windows. We're going to first look at Device Manager, see those 4 drives, but Windows, the operating system itself, cannot see those drives until we format them. So the first thing we'll do, Device Manager, see the 4 drives, then we'll go into Disk Management and format those 4 drives. So Control Panel, Device Manager, Disk Drives. The first drive is the boot drive, that's on the motherboard. Then here's our 1, 2, 3, 4 drives. Those drives are on the GloTrends Sky card. So now that we can see them, we're going to close that down. Then we'll go back into the Control Panel and go to Disk Management. I'll zoom out, close that down. Now we'll go to Administrative Tools. We'll click on that. We'll zoom in, Computer Management, and we'll go to Disk Management. Now by default, that dialog box that popped up a while ago, those drives are ready now to be formatted. So we will go New Simple Volume. We have a wizard that pops up. This will help us create our new simple volume. We're going to go next. And these are GPT disks. Shows the minimum and the maximum. We're going to go for the maximum size. Next. We're going to assign the following drive letter. And this will just go down the tree, whatever's available. D, E, F, whatever it is. You can change it, or you can set it right here now and come back and change it later. We're going to go with the default. We're going to click Next. We're going to do an NTFS format. Perform a quick format. If you want to do the old slow format, it's a good idea with the spinning drives. Haven't done it in a long time. I always do the quick format, especially with NVMe drives, SSDs, and whatever. In fact, what we're recording right now, when this goes into the switch, is an SSD. Those, when they get reformatted, is a quick format. So I'm just saying. So we'll go with a quick format. Next, and here's a list of everything that's going to occur on that one drive. We're going to do this 4 times. Finish. And there's that drive, that quick. So I need to close that. That's the drive, volume D. It's accessible now. We can put stuff on it. So we're going to do this 4 times. Now when we look over here at Disk Management, we have 4 drives, all online, ready to be used. Drive 0, which is the C drive, and all the good stuff it has to do. Then these other disks, all 4 that are on the card. Now remember, we're doing this in an 8-lane slot. So those of you that have the motherboard that has 2 16-lane slots, and when you use both slots, they both drop to 8 lanes, this is the card that you want to use, because it'll take those 8 lanes, make them available to what in essence is 16 lanes worth of drives. It's the chipset that's on the card. That's why they cost so much. That's why they cost more than, say, the ASUS Hyper QUAD, because the ASUS Hyper QUAD, which is bang for the buck, does not have built-in bifurcation. It's using the bifurcation on the motherboard. This motherboard has bifurcation on it, but we're in a slot that we're not using bifurcation on. That's why this works, so we keep it all apple and apple. Okay, we'll zoom out on that. What we're going to do is let's go to Explorer. We'll close all this down, and we'll just do Windows flag E to bring up Explorer, this PC, and there's all the drives. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now at this standpoint, we can test them, which we're going to do. And then once we've tested them, then we'll take all 4 of them, put them in a RAID, a software RAID, which again we'll do from within Windows, and we'll test them again. So we'll zoom out. We'll go to Control Panel. We'll go to Administrative Tools. Let's go to Computer Management. Now we'll go to Disk Management. And one by one, we'll take these drives offline. Delete the volume. Yes. Delete the volume. Yes. We will delete the volume. Yes. Go to number 1 and delete the volume. Yes. Now we'll do a striped volume. Welcome to the new striped volume wizard. Help to create striped volumes on disks. A striped volume stores data in stripes of 2 or more disks. A striped volume gives you faster access to your data than a simple or a span volume. We'll click on Next. So we see 3 drives available. One's already been selected. So we're going to add, click and add. We'll click and add and click and add. So we have 4 drives now that we're going to put into this one striped volume. And the goal is speed flying by the seat of our pants. So let's see what kind of performance we get. Shows how big it'll be. We're going for the maximum size. We're going to click on Next. Assign the drive letter. It will be D. We're going to say OK. And again, NTFS, new volume, default. Perform a quick format. We'll click on Next and Finish. The operation you selected will convert the select basic disks to dynamic disks. If you convert the disks to dynamic, you will not be able to start installed operating systems from any volume of the disk except the current boot volume. Are you sure you want to continue? This is not a boot disk we're getting ready to create. This is a data disk. So if you don't want to do this, you need to think seriously about this before you go that route. We're not going to boot from this. We're going to test this because this is going to be a data disk. If you say, for example, we're going to do some stuff about audio software. We've talked about it. We just haven't done it. We're going to. If you're running things like Native Instruments, or if you're running other instruments from other companies, Native Instruments, wow, there's a lot of really neat stuff there. You want something where you can stream those instruments in real time. You need capacity. So doing something like this makes sense because it's not a boot drive. Your boot drive is for your operating system and those other applications that you have very little control of what they install and where they install it. This is all about video, where you might do some of your editing from, or this is all about, if you're doing audio, where you might stream your instruments from. If you're familiar with software instruments, this is a great idea. So, okay, if we were using this for instruments, we're going to say, okay, go ahead, yes. And now we have that one volume up, and there it is. This folder is empty. So let's close that. We'll go ahead and close computer management and all that. Let's clear the screen out. Now then, let's look at Windows Explorer, this PC, and there's that new volume. Now at this point, we don't have to go back to disk management to format the drive. We can, but we can format it from right here. So, okay, now we're going to test with the Blackmagic desktop video. That should see the RAID volume instead of seeing the individual drives, so we can test that volume and see what kind of performance we get. Start, Blackmagic, and disk speed test. And there we are. Now what we want to do is choose the icon right here, what drive we want to run it. Stress, it's going to say 5 gig. We're going to select the target drive. The target drive will be this PC, and it will be this volume, D. Select that folder. So now we're going to start it. Let's see what we get. Now the purpose of this is to see if this can write to all these formats. If you're familiar with video, or if you're not familiar with video, for example, what we shoot right now, this is 1080i, and we shoot 59.94. That's NTSC. But out to the recorder that you will see on YouTube, what you'll see is 1080, probably 1080p, 29.97. It's good enough for YouTube video. But this allows you to see what your disk can perform and if it can do 4K. In other words, 4K 30 or 4K 60. Big difference. 1080 versus 4K 60, 4 times as much information. That's a whole nother story. But that's what this is showing with the formats. So we'll go back to that. It's a very complete test. AJ Video also has a test similar to this. So we'll start the test. We've chosen the format and say, will it work? ProRes, Cinema, 10-bit, and what we want to see is that everything will work. So we'll start the test. We'll bring this down a little bit so you can see the read and the write. The write is 5,022 megabytes, and the read, we're getting up to 3,872. So we're up to 5,727 and 3865. So what we're seeing is if we were doing 4K, and that's 21p60, which is actually 21p60, 59.94, it will work. It will cover everything. Now, from that standpoint, that's impressive results. What we've learned is all these programs will see the drives as drives, but we need to see those drives as a volume. And that one volume, which is a RAID volume, that makes this easy. We just said pick that drive. It saw that folder, and it's giving us the results, which are pretty good. It's a free download. You have to dig for it. We went through it, and I hope you found this useful. Now what I'll do is go back and take them out of RAID so they're individual drives, do a test with this again so we're comparing apples to apples, and then we can see. And what I'll do is a screen capture of this, and we can compare from that. Configure, save as a screenshot. And the disk speed test, I'll put it under Documents, save it right there. And we'll call that disk speed test RAID volume. So let's close the application, zoom out. We're going to go to Control Panel. We're going to get rid of our RAID, so we're comparing apples to apples. Computer management, disk management. And yes, there's other ways to get there, but we're doing this so everybody's on the same page and knows how to do it. And we are going to delete the volume. Do you want to continue? Yes. Okay, they're unallocated. Get them all 4 set. Go back and do a test. Sign a drive letter, NTFS, quick format. disk number 1, disk number 2, all the defaults, because we're going to test all 4 of the drives. New simple volume, going with the defaults, NTFS, new simple volume. Simple volume can only be a single disk, full size, default drive letter, NTFS, default file allocation unit, quick format, and then we click finish. So that should be all 4 drives. So before we close anything down, let's take a look. We've got disk 1, 2, 3, and 4. Disk 0 is the boot drive. We'll bring up Windows Explorer, start E, this PC, and there's our 4 drives with a C drive. Now I'm going to close everything down. We'll run the test again. Down here to the start menu, start, Blackmagic, disk speed test. We're going to pick a drive. So we'll click on the gear icon, select the target, this PC. We will choose the first drive in line, which will be D. Select the folder, start the test, and see how we're doing. With all 4 together, we don't quite double. We certainly do not triple, and we do not quadruple, but we meet the requirements to do 4K 60 even on a single drive. Remember, it's still NVMe, and it's still as fast as you can be. But you can see with this card, remember this card is an 8-lane card. There's 4 drives on there that require 16 lanes, and that chipset does the bifurcation and allows that to go back and forth through there. I still think that's pretty impressive to get that kind of performance. You don't double it, you don't quadruple it, you don't triple it, but you still get pretty good performance. So we'll stop the test. Let's get it up at the top. That's a good place for it. We will do a screen capture, gear icon, save a screenshot, disk speed test, single, first drive. Documents, let's go to the second drive. D, we'll go to F, select, start the test. And again, all 4 of these drives as a single drive can do 4K 60. That's what this test is about, is video. So I'll stop them at the peak. We will do screenshot, disk speed test, single first drive, and this will be second drive. Save that out. We'll come back and look at them in a minute. Let's now select the third drive, this PC, D, F, G, select, start the test. We'll let it run to peak performance, which is pretty close, pretty good. We'll save it out. Documents, this will be third drive. We can pull that information out and save it. These are PNG files. Portable network graphics. Now let's go to the gear icon. We'll select the target drive, this PC. Let's go to the last volume, H. Select it, start the test, let them get to the top. We don't want to overdo this testing thing because too much of this and we can reduce the performance of the drive. So we just want to do enough of this so we can see what it is, and then we can go on with our work or compare if this is something we consider that we want to buy bang for the buck. As far as bang for the buck, it's an expensive card, but if you want these drives and you need that on your machine, this is your option. Now you can do a search according to the chipset that's on this, and you can see who else makes a card like this. But I think this is a pretty good card for the money. It's an expensive card. It's bang for the buck in its class. There are other cards that use that same chipset that do not have the feature set that they have enabled with this. So let's finish this. Let's see, we've done 1, 2, 3. Let's do number 4. So we need to pick it, select the drive, this PC, H, select, test. Looks pretty good. Gear icon, save screenshot, documents. And this will be the fourth drive. Okay, we've run the test on all 4 drives. Now what I'll do is we'll throw this up on the screen and take a look at those numbers and see how they compare. I've taken the 2 images and I'm put them together so we have side by side, and here's what I mean. These 2 images, the image on the left, are those 4 drives in a RAID. The image on the right is the first drive that's in that RAID. So as you can see, the numbers we get for the write and for the read, the write is pretty good, 5888 megabytes versus 2686 megabytes. The read is the read is 3855 megabytes versus a read of 2996 megabytes. So what we can see by using this test that allows us to compare apples and apples, which is what we need, we're able to see what kind of read we're getting and what kind of write we're getting. We are writing at a pretty good clip. The read is pretty close to the same, but the write is pretty good. So again, it's about capacity, and that's what I wanted to show with this. Now, the thing we didn't do that we were going to do, but we ran out of time because we were remodeling. When we did the ASUS Hyper QUAD card, we were going to show some of these and get more into the nitty-gritty of what the differences were. So what I'm going to do is go back and retest, and so that we have apples and apples, not comparing just a physical disk to a virtual disk in the sense of a RAID volume like this. We'll use the same test. We'll use this test. If we were, say, trying to get SSDs to work to record some of the stuff we do, this is the test we'd use. So this will work for video. This is also a good example of audio. I don't think, as far as audio goes, you're going to have a problem with streaming instruments. Again, because you're using NVMe, it's as fast as the technology goes. And as we go to PCI Express 4, we're using version 1. Version 2 is coming out shortly. It's just a little bit faster, but it's coming out with a new controller, so it's going to be a big deal. How much faster, we'll see when we get it. We'll test it. But again, this is comparing apples and apples. Let's take a look. We're showing the 4 drives on the left in a RAID, and we're showing one drive, the first drive, not in RAID. So you can see how the performance compares. 5888 megabytes to 2686 megabytes on the right. And then for the read, we get 3855 megabytes versus 2996 megabytes. We're talking 4 drives that should be 16 lanes, but we're on an 8-lane slot. Pretty good performance. So this is about, to reiterate and to recap, this is about the GloTrends Sky and Palace cards. We've installed the newer version, which is the Sky, because it can use an 8-lane slot. Now we can take this and turn around and try it in a 16-lane slot. We should see a performance improvement, a performance enhancement. But this is as far down as it goes. Now, the other cards we're going to be testing are all going to be 4-drive cards. They will have requirements that require a high-end desktop. But we wanted to take this to a spot where so many people had questions, will this work in my computer? So this is Builder Buy. I think that's a good wrap. I hope you enjoyed this video. My name is Gil Boyd. We would appreciate thumbs up. Subscribe. We would also appreciate that. We look forward to seeing you in the next video. I want to thank you all for your patience. You're amazing. That's a wrap. Welcome to Builder Buy. More NVMe in the next video. Keep watching. Wow.